Today we're going to talk about the prototype design pattern. In this series, I talk about all the design patterns which are easiest to understand and implement. In the first part of the video, we're going to be creating a sample project with the prototype design pattern. In the second part, we'll look at how Laravel is using the prototype design pattern. Now, we've all seen blog posts before. We see an article with a clone option beneath it. And this comes in really handy when you create a template with just the right font size, the right font color, and you want everybody else within your company to use that style. So you create a template and then you tell people to clone it. And whatever they write is going to look the way you want it to look. Now behind the scenes, you usually have this, a page model, and then you create the template out. Anybody who clones that will usually hit code like this, where you take the original template, copy its title and content. The only thing you change is the author. Now given that Laravel has been around for a while, there must be an option where we can do it in a much more simpler way. And there is. You take the original template, you call replicate on it. This is built into Laravel. After that, you call the fill method. This allows you to overwrite certain values. If you look at the original template, author is set to null. We don't want that. When someone is publishing it, we want their ID instead, so we can show that on the website. Now, granted, you could take the simpler approach, but as time goes by, this gets really complicated. This is why we use design patterns. And in this video, we're going to use a design pattern to solve this problem. Now, this is a real-world problem. Once you go through it, you'll have a much more clear idea of what this design pattern is and how it can solve future problems you might have. To give you an overview of what we're going to create, we're going to be creating a blog project. And in this, we'll have categories, tags, and then obviously we'll have values inside of them. For those of you who are not familiar with these terms, categories is a much more broader term where you say university topics, high school topics. This is something people see and click on. The tags are pretty much buzzwords that you might hear in the news or in the media, something people are actually searching for. It could be the president cutting budgets, teacher strike is going on. And using these words, when people Google you up, they can see these words and they're still linked to the same exact title. Having said all that, let's get into it. Hit that subscribe button. So what is a prototype design pattern? Earlier I gave you the example of the blog site. Let's look at that example in a little bit more detail. So I have my page which has title and content. So this could be one table, but the page needs to be linked to categories. And I simply can't just link it to categories because a single category can belong to many different pages that we create over time. And a page can have many categories. This is a many-to-many relationship between two tables, which requires a pivot table. And if you've created that in Laravel before, you know that it requires you using alphabetically linking these two tables while making their names singular. So this kind of maps out. We'll have a pivot table which has a category ID and a page ID. Next, the categories also has a created by. Who created this category? And we're linking it to the users table. Lastly, we have the tags table. Again, a tag can belong to many pages and a page can have many tags. This many-to-many also requires a pivot table, and we're using the same rules for this. This is our template, and we're going to try to create many copies of this. So the question is, if I have a page with many categories, tags, and we know who created it, we want to make a copy of it. How do we do that? That is the prototype design pattern. You have a complex structure like this, where one page is linking to categories, tags, users. You want to make a duplicate of it. How do you go about doing that in a professional manner is what the prototype design pattern is about. This is the template which requires copies. Now let's jump to Tinker and look at this. I'm going to go to my console. By the way, if you like this tool that you just saw, I have a link to it in the description. I have a video I talk about it. Also in the cards above, you should see a link there as well. Now moving forward, I'm going to type PHP Artisan Tinker. I've already gone ahead and created some tables and data inside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the first record, page, and I've created relationships as well. So I've created a relationship to categories and then to the tags. Next, I'll grab the first one. Let's scroll up and see what we have. Above, you'll see that there's title, there's body. They're the categories that this particular page has. Then if I scroll down, I see the tags that this particular page has. Now let's try to create a copy of it. And let's say page duplicate. This is where I'll save the copy. I can say page, and inside of Laravel, there's a replicate method. It creates a copy of the page and puts it inside of this one. So I'm going to hit enter and you'll see that a copy was created. I see the same title, I see the categories, I see the tags. Now, inside of page duplicate, After hitting replicate, I need to say save. So it actually saves that information into the database. Up until now, it was just in the RAM. It was just it wasn't permanent. Now I'm going to say page duplicate, and I'm going to say refresh. Refresh will cause it to go to the database and get a fresh copy of the duplicate that we just created. I'm going to hit that, and as soon as I do that, I see something wrong. I see the title, I see the body, but my categories and my tags are blank. Why is that? The problem with the replicate method is it only makes a single level copy. It doesn't go into depth. It doesn't care if you add categories, if you add tags. It ignores those. It only stays on the first level. And whatever you had in the first table is what it copies. Now in this video, we're first going to look at how pure PHP makes a copy of classes or objects. Then when we have a good understanding of that, we'll move on to Laravel, and we'll see how we can do that in Laravel. Meaning we just saw the replicate method doesn't go into making deep copies. The depth is only at the first level. We'll see how we can increase that to get more copies out of it. Lastly, we'll do a code dive, and we'll see what the replicate method is really doing behind the scene. Now before we do that, my question to you is, earlier we saw that we created a template and we had other people clone it. So why not call this the template design pattern? Why is it called the prototype design pattern? In order to understand that, we're going to use Elon Musk as an example. When Elon Musk first created the Cybertruck, he only made one copy of it. And the reason for that is he wanted to see if there was an interest for it, if people actually like this thing. Imagine making 100 copies of this thing and then realizing nobody else wants to buy it. That has to come out of your own pocket. So for entrepreneurs and people in the marketing industry, they created the term prototype, meaning when you only make one copy of it, you take it to market, see if people are interested. In the case of Elon Musk, when he did that, a lot of people made orders for it. They said, we want this. They put down the order, gave the money. And then after getting the orders, he made many copies of this thing. But that very first copy he made, the template, is called the prototype. Whenever you talk about this pattern, make sure you use the word prototype, because there's another pattern called the template pattern. We don't want to confuse the two. We're always going to call this the prototype design pattern, which means you have the original and you want copies of this thing. So now we're going to try to create this structure in PHP. What we'll do is we'll create a page class, which will have a categories object and a tags object. Once we create this structure in pure PHP, we'll understand what the prototype design pattern is. And once we get that, we'll then be able to move into Laravel and implement this there as well. I'm going to jump to VS Code. In app HTTP, I'm going to right click, go to new folder, and I'll create a folder called services. Inside of services, I'm going to create a page service. Here, I'll create the basic setup. And again, if you're using VS Code, you should see that right up here. So app, there we go. Class, page, service. Now let's create the properties. Now I could create the properties here. In fact, let me do that first. I've created protected title. And if I hold down my Shift, Alt, and down arrow key, in VS Code, it creates a duplicate for you. Now let's call this body, categories, and tags. Now let's create the constructor. And then inside of this, we'll be assigning values. So let's go with title, body, categories. Now let's assign them. I'll do this behind the scenes. I'm sure it's really exciting to watch. Okay, now this is done. So whatever values I get assigned, I'm going to be assigning them to my properties. Now, if you're using PHP 8, there's a much more simpler way to do this. You can in fact define your properties right here within the same single line. So let's do that. I'm going to remove it from here. And then over here, I'll say protected. In fact, let me just copy and paste. And now since I have it over here, whatever values are passed in as arguments for title are actually assigned to the property protected title. I don't have to do this. I can just in fact remove this and it would be the same. And since this seems simpler, let's use it. Let's format it a little bit better though. Okay, it looks a bit nicer now. Now let's create a getter. So let's go with get content. Let's copy and paste this to... Now let's create the categories class. I'm going to go back. In the services folder, I'll create a new file called category service.php. Create the basic setup. And then let's create the class. And it should have properties. So this time I'll just take the shortcut and create it right inside the construct. And we don't need the body at this point. Okay, so now we have the category as well. Let's create the tags class. In fact, it's going to be so similar. Let me just copy this. I'll go here. Inside the services folder, I'll create a file called tag service.php. I'm going to paste everything in here and make some minor changes. Let's take category and turn it into tag. And everything else seems to be the same. Now back in the page service class, I'm going to modify the get content so we can easily get the categories information as well when we say get content. So this I'll save into. Next, I'm going to loop through my categories and get all the information from them. So I'll say for each categories as category, we'll say category get name. In fact, let's change this variable from page to response. We'll copy this, throw it in here, and let's put a dot on the left-hand side. What this means is whatever is in the response variable, just add it to whatever is on the right-hand side. So this should work out for us. In fact, again, let me just copy and paste this. And now I can change it to, from categories, I can say tags, tag, we'll make this tag, and then again it's appended to response. Now let's return the response. I'm going to go to my web file. So instead of navigating through the Explorer, which you could easily scroll down, find the routes, I'm going to take the shortcut. I'm going to hold down the control, hit the P button, and type in routes web. There we go. I've created a control called page controller. Inside of it is an index method. I'm going to control click into that. And over here, I'll create that object. So I'll say page is equal to, I'm going to write page service, and this suggestion shows up. I'm going to select it. As soon as I do that, at the top, it brings in the library. Go ahead and create an object of this. And from this, it's expecting some arguments from me. So the first one is clearly going to be the title. So I'll say some title. And the content will be, let's say, some content. I'm not that creative, you could tell by now. Now the categories, we have to create actual objects. So I'm going to go one line above this thing and say categories, and I'll turn this into an array. I'm going to hit tab, and you can tell at the top it was brought in. I'm saying this because just in case you're not using VS Code. I'm going to go ahead and create an object of this. It's expecting an argument from me, which is really its name. So I'll say category example 1 of 1. Okay, it should be definitive enough. Now I'm going to hold down the Shift, Alt, and down arrow key. Creates a copy. I'll do it again. I'm going to select all of this and hold down the Shift, Alt, and down arrow key again. And this creates a copy for me. So I'm going to make some minor changes. I'll change categories into tags. And then over here, I'll change this. I'll change this into tag service. And as soon as I write tag service, it's brought in at the very top, and now I can start using it. In fact, one last change would be to change this from category is to tag. Now that I have categories and tags that I've just created, I'm going to pass them in to my constructor here. Categories and then tags. Now when I say echo page get content, I should see something on the screen. So in my browser, I see the title, which I assigned to it. I also see the categories, which I assigned along with the tags that I've created. Now that we have a structure, let's try to clone this thing. I'm going to go back to VS Code. Let's create a clone right here. I'm going to come here and say page clone. There's a PHP keyword called clone page. This is the object that we have right here. It should create a clone right now. I'm going to copy this, replace it with this one, and hit save. Let's go to the browser. I'm going to hit refresh, and I see the same exact values. PHP has actually gone in and made those changes for me. PHP has made a complete clone for me. So here's what PHP has done. It went to page and made a copy of that. Then it went to categories, made a copy of it, linked it, and did the same with tags. This is what pure PHP does. Just the keyword clone will make a deep level copy for you. It doesn't matter if you have 2 levels, 3, 4, 10, it will go ahead and make a complete clone for you. So our goal in the beginning was to create a copy of the structure. We had a page class which had an object of categories and an object of tags. It could be many tags. And we wanted a copy of this thing, the whole structure. And we realized all we had to do was use the clone keyword, and PHP behind the scenes did all the work for us. If you look at just this one line, this is the prototype design pattern. Seeing how simple this was, now we're going to see how can we implement this right inside of Laravel. Now let's try to create the same structure inside of Laravel. We'll create a page table, and then we'll create a categories table and a tags table. Like I said earlier, a page can have many tags and a tags can have many pages. So this is a many-to-many relationship. That's why I have this pivot table here. I have the same thing on the left-hand side with categories page. A page can have many categories and so on. You're probably familiar with it by now. Let's go to VS Code and take a look. I'm going to open my migrations. And if you look at the pages table, I've created a title, a body, and you know what? It shouldn't be nullable. Let me save it this way. Then I have an author ID, which is linked to the users table. Let's take a look at the categories table. And the categories table has a name and a user ID, which is linked to the users table. Let's go to the tags table. And the tags table has similar structure. It has a name and an ID. Then if you look at the pivot table, now here's the pivot table for category page. I'm saving the categories and the pages. Pretty much simple stuff. And the same thing is happening with the pages tag table. I'm saving the tags and the pages. And again, this code is going to be on GitHub. A link, it will be in the description. Let me close all these files. We'll take a brief look at the factories as well. I have a factory for the category. I have one for the page, the tag class, and user factory. The real work is being done inside the seeders. So if you take a look at category seeder, I'm looping through all these categories and I'm specifying the type of category I want created. So I'm overriding the ones that the faker is going to give me. Then let's go to page seeder, pretty much simple stuff. Same thing is happening in tag seeder. Now when we go to the database seeder, this is where a little bit of a twist shows up. I'm running through the seeders that I've created, but in the end, I'm making sure that my pivot tables also have data inside of them. After I run the seeder class, I should have some data in the database tables to play around with. Let's go to the command prompt. I'm going to say PHP migrate fresh and then call seed. Now if I go to phpMyAdmin, I can see that the data is there. Let's go back to VS Code. I'm going to close all these files and it's time to get to work. Let's create the prototype design pattern inside of Laravel now. So I'm going to say Control P, page.php. There's the model I was looking for. And if I scroll up, I'll see the relationships that I've defined. Now a page can have categories and it can also have tags. If I control click on the model, by the way, if you don't have this feature inside of your VS Code, where you're able to control click into it, you need an extension. So if you go to the left hand side and you click on this icon, you need to install 2 extensions. One is PHP IntelliFence by Ben Mewburn and another one is PHP Namespace Resolver by Mehdi Hassan. Both of these are really helpful. Install them. It should give you the ability to control click into classes. Now we're going to control click into the model. I want you to hit Control F and look for the replicate method. Now this method I showed to you earlier in the video. What it does is it creates a 1-level copy of whatever model you have. So if you're talking about the page model, it will only replicate page attributes. It won't go into the relationships. It will just create a single level copy. What we're going to do is we're going to override this method. I'm going to come back to page and most of you are probably asking, well, a few minutes ago inside the pure PHP class that we created, what we did was we said the clone keyword and then the name of the object. And this allowed us to create a deep level copy of it. Why not just do that now? Why do we need the replicate method I showed a few seconds ago? And the problem here is that we're inside of a framework. If I create an object of this class and do a clone of it, it's going to create more things than I wanted. It's not just going to go and create the categories and make sure that the data is saved in the database tables. It will try to create more methods of it. Bottom line, it's not going to work. We have to take a different approach. And that approach is override the replicate method. So I'm going to go ahead and try to create that. As soon as I type a few characters, it gives me a suggestion. I'm going to take it and let me just remove this extra garbage. And you'll notice that there is a parameter here now. This is the accept parameter. You can pass in attributes that you don't want copied. Now, if I go to my table migration, I'll say create page. Inside of this migration, you'll notice that both of these attributes are required. If I try to skip one, it will give me an error. So if I make this nullable, now I can say don't copy the body attribute, and that would work. That's what this parameter is here for. In case you have some attributes which are allowed to be nullable and you don't want them copied, you could use that. But we're not going to be doing that. So let me just Control Z over here in the migration. I'll come back and let's move forward. The first thing I'm going to do is create a page object. So I'll say go to the parent, use the replicate, and this will create a copy of the page instance or the row in the table that we have. I'm going to come here, and after this, it's important to call the save method on it. Next, we're going to come here and we're going to say this instance, and I want you to get the categories for it. And for each one of these, let's loop through them and let's call each instance category for now. But since this is a closure, I won't have access to the variables outside of it. So I need to pass one variable in, and that's the page object. So let me pass that in. Let me actually put a semicolon here as well. Now over here, I'll take the page object. I'll call the categories relationship on them, and then I'll say attach. Now for those of you who are familiar with the many-to-many relationship, in order to add data into the pivot tables, this is the method that you use. You first refer to the relationship, then you call the attach method on it, the current category that we're looping through. Let's go over this code for a second. I'm saying that take the page object that we just created, which is a replica of it, go to its categories relationship, and put this in its pivot table. I'm going to copy and paste the same thing and do that for tags. In fact, let me hold down Shift Alt and down arrow key. I'm going to change this to tags. In fact, let me change this to tags as well. And then this is the single instance of the tag. So let's make it tag. Same here. And last but not least, I have to return the page object which is just created. Now let's test this out. I'm going to go back to the command prompt. I'm going to say PHP artisan tinker. Let's get the first object, which should be app models page, and let's get the relationships as well, tags, and then let's get the first object. Let's scroll through and make sure we got the right information. So we're getting the pages information, we're getting the categories linked to it, and if I scroll down, I see the tags as well. Let me clear the screen. Now, with this page object, I want to create a copy. So let me name this new variable page copy. And then with page, I'll call the replicate method on it. When I hit enter, I see this whole list. Okay, let me clear the screen one more time. I'm going to take the page copy instance and I'll call the refresh method on it. Again, what the refresh does is it goes back to the database table, gets the data and puts it back in. I just want to make sure I have the exact data. Once I do that, I'm going to scroll up. I can see clearly that now it's referring to page ID 2. Before, it only had one record, so that must have been page ID 1. So I see that it's working. Let's go to phpMyAdmin and see if that's working. I'm here in phpMyAdmin. I'm going to click on the pages table. And I can see there's 2 records there. This is the one that we just have. So we copied 1 and made 2. You can even see the data is identical. Now let's go to the pivot tables. Inside the categories page table, you can easily see that these records have been copied over. These categories are now referring to the page ID of 2, which means it was a successful clone. I'm going to move on to the other pivot table, which is the pages tag table. And again, you'll see that the tag IDs have been copied over and now they're referring to a different page ID, the one we just created. So it looks like everything went well. I'm going to jump back over to VS Code. So let's review what we just did. We couldn't just use the clone keyword that comes with PHP to clone an object because this is a framework. So instead of Laravel, we had to override the replicate method. Now this replicate method, we first copied the page object. Then we went into each relationship this thing had and then made a copy of it. In fact, if there were more relationships, we would have to keep doing this. This is how you implement the prototype design pattern inside of Laravel. In this last part of the video, we're going to do a bit of a code dive. We're going to see what's going on behind this replicate method. Now, Laravel does not use the traditional clone that we've seen PHP use. It uses this replicate method. So let's see what's going on behind it. I'm going to scroll up and control click into model. Once here, I'm going to do control F and search for replicate. And there it is. Alright, so the first thing you want to notice is the argument you're passing in is an array, and it's optional. The array you pass in will be the attributes that you want excluded when you make a copy of this particular model. Now we want to look at this part, array filter. In case you're not familiar with it, let's go to Tinker. I'm going to go to my command prompt and let's tinker in. Now I'm going to write down array filter. Let's pass in an array. Now we're going to put a function there and say name. We're going to go through each one of these names and let's get the length of each one of these names. And if the length of these names is greater than, let's say, 5, then those are the names that I want. I passed in an array of names. Then I gave it this function. So each one of those names are being passed to this value, and then I'm checking the length of these. The ones that are above 5 are the ones I want to keep. When I hit enter, I get a new array, and these are the ones that pass this particular test. So it's really just a boolean, true or false, on the basis of which it's filtered. So that's what this is. But what if I take out this function? What happens now? It seems to be just returning exactly what I gave it. Well, let's see. If I put in 0, then false, and then 1. Now when I hit enter, it only gives me truly values. It's taken out the falsy values. You see the 0 and the false is gone. It only keeps the truly values. Now that we know what this is, let's go back to the code. And that's what array filter does. Array values takes only the values of this. It removes the keys. And then we're left with the defaults. Now let's take a look at the values passed inside the array filter. The first one is get key name. If you control click into this, you'll notice it's trying to get the primary key, meaning the primary value. And then the next one is get created at column, get updated at column, which are really just getting the created at and updated at values. You'll notice that it's doing exactly that. It's saying static created at. Same thing is happening with updated at column. This unique IDs, I don't have any that I want to include in this, so that's going to be blank for me. So this variable default now holds all these values. I'm going to scroll down. The part we want to focus on is this part right here. It says this get attributes. Once you go there, it's going to get all the attributes of the table. In fact, you can control click into it and you'll see that it's trying to get the attributes. Now these attributes were set when the model was first loaded up. I'm going to go back. Now this array class was built in Laravel. And in fact, if you Google it up right now, it's part of their library. And what accept does is it says, take this particular array, whatever values you've been given on the left-hand side, and then exclude from it whatever is on the right-hand side. So in this one, we first look at accept. Now these are the values that you wanted it to exclude. So it checks, did you give it values? In our case, we didn't. So if you go right past this and into the else clause, the else clause has what? ID, created at, updated at. We don't want to copy those. We want the ID to be unique. We want the created at and updated at to be the current value. So we don't want those copied over. But in the event somebody does give us the accept array, then we say, okay, merge the accept with the defaults. The default being the ID, created at, updated at. Merge those two and then get the unique values in case someone gave in the same value twice accidentally. With that new array, exclude these list of values from whatever attributes we're trying to copy or that are in the database table. These are then passed into attributes. These are the attributes that we want copied. We get to this part of the code, which is tap. So in case you're not familiar with the tap, you first pass it one value. Now this value says new static, which is really just creating an object of whichever class is calling it. Now in our case, since model is being extended by page, we're really getting an object of page. Next, we pass that object or that instance into this function. And since it's a closure, we're passing in the attributes as well. If you don't pass these in using use, we don't have access to them within this function because it's a closure. Now, with these attributes, the attributes are set using the setter function, and then the relations that are part of it are also set using this function. It's important to note that this method is not really copying the relations, it's just setting them. It's never going to duplicate the relations for you, is just making a reference to it. As we covered earlier in the video, only the attributes in the page table will be copied. Any relations, like the categories or the tags, they're not going to be copied over. Lastly, this one line of code is telling Laravel, look, I want you to go ahead, take the attributes I've given you, and make a copy of it, and make an insertion into the table. I'm not going to go into the Fire model event, because it uses a lot of the event-based system that it has, and that would be a video all on its own. For the purposes of this video, we're trying to focus on the prototype design pattern. So hopefully by now you understand what the prototype design pattern is. You've built it yourself using pure PHP, and then you've also done a bit of a code dive to see how Laravel is doing it. Having said that, guys, I put a lot of effort into these videos. The least you could do is click one button, so hopefully that's not too difficult for you. Until next time, stay safe and have fun.